The question is for today is how do we make sure that everybody has a role to play in the future? How do we make sure that our children can adapt regardless of what technology comes along and what happens to them in the future? Because right now we're teaching them for jobs that don't even exist or won't exist in 5 years' time or even 2 years' time. We can't even tell them what the new jobs are going to be because we don't even know what they are yet.
If there was a kind of stream in terms of your thought about the world that we're moving towards, what is that world?
I think we're moving to a model from wealth to intelligence. So I think in the next 5 years, our economy will be based on intelligence and how much we can share it, how much we can use it. And I would even say that data and energy now are becoming much more important than water to a nation. I guess the final piece of the puzzle, which was always more exciting to me than crypto, is tokenization, because the tokens give you utility. So the power of utility for me trumps any store of value, because utility actually makes ecosystems function. Financial inclusion has never been solved. Primarily, it's an identity problem because a lot of people can't prove their identity. Secondly, some people don't have a home, so they can't have a home address to get a bank account. Now, the data chasm could be even worse. Now, this opens up a whole myriad of problems, and it actually impacts the technology more than we think. So if these models that power agents, AI, only has one version of the world, and the other half is dark, how on earth is that model ever reaching its potential when it's only got half a view of the world's data?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the All in Crypto podcast. I am your host, Rupert Pickering, and today I am delighted to be joined by Michael Clarke, a global advisor working with leaders, governments, and investors on the hard decisions around technologies like AI, data, and emerging technologies, what to commit to, how to execute, and how to govern it without breaking public trust. Across the last 2 decades, he's been inside the systems where these decisions have real consequences, building large-scale platforms, shaping next-generation digital banking and payments thinking, and help decision makers treat data as a real-world asset rather than just a exhaust. He's also the author of Our Moment, which we're going to be talking about because I think it's very relevant to the world that we're living in today, which is a modern fable exploring human potential in an age of AI, a lens that keeps conversations grounded in people, not just technology. So, Michael, bit of a longer intro there. Welcome on board.
Thank you so much. This is going to be fun.
The pleasure is all mine. Before we start, many of our viewers and listeners may be new to yourself. Maybe we could start with a little bit of an introduction into Michael Clarke, who you are, and how you ended up where you are today.
I think So how I got here, I think the easiest and 50,000 feet view is either this was a conscious decision or it was completely unconscious, but I ended up following the path almost like what a good CEO would. I ended up doing every job in a company, which has actually benefited me in the end because it's kind of allowed me to put puzzle pieces together because you can see the patterns, but you also understand the implications. So, I've gone from sales, marketing, big change teams to building real world products. And luckily I got roles in really big Fortune 500 companies. But at the same time, I also got the benefit of working for startups, as well as designers. So I kind of had that full breadth, which kind of has served me well, but has probably enabled me to write the book that I did because I could apply a customer lens, a technology lens, a business lens, but more importantly, a human lens. So that's kind of how I got here. Who I am now, I guess I always make the joke, I didn't become a consultant because I wanted to. There was just nothing left to do. And to be honest, I don't look at myself as a consultant now. I kind of wear a few hats. One is obviously the author hat. The other is an advisor, because I think I use this line quite a lot. I think what people need now is clarity before consequences, because there's so much noise. If you're an investor, if you're a C-suite leader, if you're a government, if you're a regulator, if you can imagine, we're living in an age where change is constant. You're having to make decisions very quickly, but you don't necessarily know if that is the right path for you because of all the connections and so on. So that's kind of where I play a lot of my time, is advising leaders across those different dimensions. I'm also a product builder because product is a place in my heart strongly. So some of the things that are in the book, I'm actually actively building. I'm working with people to build. And obviously then there's the public speaking side as well. which again is more about awareness. But at the same time, I pride myself on not telling people what to do. I also tell them how to do it, because I think people have had enough of being told what and why in dystopia. I think they also need answers. So I try to do much more of that than just leave the mic and leave them all guessing. So that's kind of my world today. And for your viewers, I live in Dubai, so I'm not in the UK anymore. So I kind of spend my life here now, which is nice because I'm in a hub. I can get to a lot of places around the world, but also obviously I feel like I'm in the heart of a lot of innovation and change here.
Yeah, certainly a lot of people in my industry, the majority of people in my industry that I know have left the UK and are in places like Dubai, and they'll cite similar reasons because it's just a hub. You know, they bump into people all the time at restaurants that are in similar fields, or perhaps maybe not in crypto but AI, and it just seems like a great place to be. And I definitely want to move on to your book, Our Moment. It's a powerful book with a powerful message. It's very relevant to today. Before we do that, maybe a bit of a personal question that I think my audience would be interested in is how, with all the uncertainty in the world, do you find some sort of an anchorage to gain a perspective of this world to be able to advise people on? You know, what is it you look at around you that you can kind of anchor yourself on at a time in human history where I don't think we've ever seen so much uncertainty with technologies and things like this? How do you approach the world as we know it? Is it really just a case of looking at the technologies that are available and where they're going to be implemented or how they're going to be implemented? How do you approach the world as we know it to sort of be able to advise people in it?
It's an interesting question because I wrote a piece on this morning. I guess I try not to look at the obvious, because I think everybody runs to the same thing often, but they don't look for the patterns. Um, so I don't wear one lens. I almost look at the world through multiple lenses. So I'm kind of looking at, I used to work for JP Morgan as well. So I can look at markets. So I look at economies and I look at markets. Then I look at technology, but also you can't look at today. You also have to look backwards because some of the things we see today are just repeating themselves, just a bit quicker. So you have to look backwards. You're almost looking at it like a macroeconomist would. You're kind of looking at the world like it's a football pitch, and you're looking down, and you're reading various sources, but also based on experience. Which is, I think, this is one of the benefits of coming from industry. I think if you, and this is not to do a disservice to consultants, but you often, as a consultant, don't live with your decisions. You deliver what you need to deliver, and you leave. Whereas I was the poor guy that delivered and had to stay. So that industry experience, but also that interconnected nature of businesses and geopolitics actually helps me because I can look at it from real world experience. And then because I can touch all of these dimensions, which is a bit like a superpower in a way, because I can understand the language of customer, I understand the language of an engineer, I understand the language of a business person, a broader technologist, but also markets. I'm kind of looking not for what I can see, what I can't see. And it's almost like everything I do goes back to first principles, as in what do I know to be true? And then what am I not actually seeing? And sometimes that requires you to do a bit of historical digging to find some patterns that say, well, actually, this is a bit silly because this is history repeating itself. Or actually, you shouldn't do this. This is really silly. So let's give you an example of how leadership advice plays out, right? So let's just say a leader wants to invest in AI. And this is a real world example, right? This comes from a talk I did a while ago. A leader, I made the case that, look, you shouldn't implement solutions looking for problems because you end up in a whole world of pain. But the CEO said to me, actually, sometimes with AI, it's a good thing because it actually helps us find opportunity. So sometimes we don't have problems, but we might have things we haven't thought about, which is fair, right? And his ask for me was, well, should I go all in on AI? Because everybody tells me I should. Now, if you take a step back, what he said is correct. But if you break that into two parts, the answer is probably going to be very different for him. So my advice to him was strategically, absolutely go all in on AI. Make that a strategic decision for your business. But that doesn't mean you go all in on your investment because that would just be silly, right? Because that's like putting 100% in a casino on red and hoping it works out. So from experience, having delivered products and businesses and seen so many of these failures because we go all in and hope it's going to work, I can pull him back and say, right, split that decision into two parts. The first part is, yes, you need to commit 100% to your strategy and communicate it effectively to your business. And also remove the fear of change from your staff, because everybody will hopefully won't believe they're going to lose their job, as they shouldn't. The second piece then is deploy that investment incrementally, one use case at a time. So knowing and being how these big bang approaches work and fail, I can then turn it around from him and go, look, I've been where you are. I've been in this position before. I've seen how this plays out. You may not want to do it that way. So it's a combination of me being in the field for real and connecting the dots across multiple sectors, obviously doing my own reading. But at the same time, then, like a famous person said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Yep.
And I think that still holds true, that statement.
I think the statement that knowledge is power also rings very true in regards to how you can leverage that knowledge that might be from all these different fields. There might be some historical knowledge, there might be some technological knowledge, there might be some economical knowledge that you can kind of pin together, and it can help you get a good understanding of the world that we're in, and perhaps the one more importantly, arguably, that we're heading towards. And I love it that you bring this.
Sorry to stop you. I would
Sure.
just add, I actually think wisdom is power, not knowledge. Because
explain the difference for people, because wisdom, knowledge,
wisdom is executable knowledge. So
okay.
Wisdom is the knowledge that you actually do something with. I think we've become too accustomed of stockpiling knowledge and doing nothing with it. So,
Yep.
And that's actually why AI is exposing a lot of the problems today, because we've become far too comfortable accumulating PowerPoints and
Yes.
accumulating information, but very rarely do we see people acting upon it effectively. So I guess the difference, and coming back to myself a little bit, it's, yes, I have all of this knowledge and, luckily I know how to piece it together. I think the real value add that is helping someone how to turn that into action.
Yep.
Because I think as we move forward with AI, and we're going to talk about a bit of that today, that wisdom component is going to be fundamental to differentiate us between us and the machine.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I know a lot of very knowledgeable people that do nothing but just sit on the couch and tell you how you should maneuver your life. But actually, that knowledge doesn't get them very far. So I think that's brilliant, the distinction there. Let's come on to your book, because this is a very sort of powerful and relevant book. It's centered around Ezra, who is a kind of teenage boy. And it's set at a time where he's growing up in a world on the brink of transformation that's brought about by technologies. And I feel like that world that is described is very much the one that we're living in, certainly for anybody of that age group, but more broadly. And I think there's a lot of transferables in regards to the book that you wrote and the message and where we are today. So maybe we could just start off with an introduction into our moment, and then we're going to get into some of the various components and how it's relatable to today's world.
So the book itself is, I'm laughing because the book itself has been written about 3 times, and it probably had about 400 titles. So something happened really in the writing process. So if we take a step back, the book actually came from a paper that I wrote 4 years ago, maybe. I was asked to write the story of the history of data. This is kind of a well-known thing that people have seen me on podcasts before. In writing it, it was almost like, my God, this is an economy in front of me and something different. So when I started writing the book itself, the original version, I was also doing R&D. So because a lot of the things in our moment towards the end of the book are actually real. Everything in the book is real. All the facts are real. It's just been blended into a story. So 2 years of writing was very much R&D, solving real world problems with real solutions. When the book was finished, one, I didn't like it. I didn't like the voice that I'd written in. Secondly, it was too many things for too many people. So when I wrote the history of technology, that was for everyone. And then suddenly I was telling the world the how, and I lost everybody apart from policy people and government. So it was just too many things for too many people. So I took a step back and almost had to remove all the stuff I'd learned over all the years of my career, and remembered why I got into this in the first place, which was, the book side of it anyway, which was the love of reading and writing, right? So I just went back to my favorite authors, and I decided The facts need to remain, but the world needs a story to believe in and a hero to fight for. Because in the end, we all remember stories and we remember the one. So in a way, what the book became was more than I actually planned it to be. Because in the beginning, it was just, hey, let me just tell you the history of technology. No one's told you. I'll tell you what to do, and you'll be very happy. In the end, it became a story about identity, and it became a story about purpose, and it became a story about direction. So the title landed on was, yeah, it was very surreal, even the subtitle. But it felt right when I said it, because I felt this is a moment in history that we may never get again. Since the industrial age, we haven't had a time where everything we know is changing. And because of it, almost like this is our moment, because we get to decide how we want this to play out, the direction that we want the technology, our education system, our markets, all these things. Everything we've known is at a kind of tipping point. And at the heart of this is really us and our human potential and what we can become in collaboration with technology, not fighting against it. So that almost then gave me a backdrop of a narrative. Um, and I made him a boy for various reasons. Um, but then I also had so much fun because, first of all, my favorite book was The Alchemist. So the writing style was very much written in that mode. Um, but then I thought, well, I can't directly copy that. How do I make it more modern? So basically, all the cinematography and descriptions are from Blade Runner. So I basically melded Blade Runner and The Alchemist together, and it almost became someone said to me, it feels like the precursor to the Matrix. It's almost like before it happened. This is what the book feels like. But the thing I managed to pull off, which I'm most excited about, is I actually didn't lose all of the real world facts um, that people wanted. So no, ironically, the book itself didn't take very long to write in the end because the facts were there. It's just the hardest bits were character arcs and world building and all the boring, actually the exciting stuff you have to do in fiction. But then blending it together was the interesting bit. And the feedback's been amazing, particularly the audiences and this is who it was written for really, is the people who don't know any different. The people who don't know any different and don't know nothing are the people who I've had the best feedback from. And in a way, that makes me happier because the book was never really written for the people who know everything. It's really for the people who have questions and may not know nothing.
By the way, guys, as we're going through this, if anyone wants to check out that book, there's a link to it in the description. Well worth it, certainly in regards to where we are today, which is where I want to kind of bring the book to. You mentioned that a lot of the challenges that we're facing the world and the world of our moments are real challenges, real kind of changes that are taking place. Maybe we can talk about some of them and kind of put ourselves in the character of Ezra in the real world, if that makes sense. I mean, let's maybe talk about some of the problems that you outline in that book, some of the technologies that you see playing into this story that you've put together.
So I think the first thing the biggest problem is us, I guess, which is really the part of it. You on a daily basis now we celebrate new tools, new platforms, new technology. There's lots of charts which show us how many AI tools are being released on a daily basis, and it is fast, right? But nobody celebrates us. Like how are we strengthening our abilities? How are we doing the things that we need to do? So one of the big things in the book is the fact that none of us have really ever reached our full potential um, because of the way that we've been educated and the way that I guess work is done today. And the biggest challenge now in the book, and even for society, is that technology is moving at such a pace. And we'll come back to that knowledge and wisdom comment I made. The biggest challenge is now AI now owns knowledge. So the thing that we stockpiled for decades is no longer ours. That belongs to a machine who's faster than we are and can interrogate it and can pull that content back faster than you and I. That's great because that saves me an awful lot of time, but it also exposes our weaknesses. Because of the way we've been taught, we now have to, if we're really serious about all of this, we have to almost do pivot and rethink how we teach and how we learn and how we work. Because if we don't, there's a huge chasm on the horizon. Another big part of the book is inclusion. So, I work for financial services. I understand financial inclusion, how bad that is, and how we've never really solved it. The biggest challenge today is actually data exclusion or inclusion, because that chasm could get vast, which means then that AI will only be in the hands of a select few rather than everyone. So we have this almost technology is zooming over there. If you imagine like a 100-meter racetrack and the human race is racing after it, but instead of actually keeping pace by adjusting the things that need changing, we are shoehorning the old ways of working in technology that's way more advanced. So the whole book is about, we made mistakes in the past approaching technology. The question is for today, and some of the challenges is, how do we make sure that everybody has a role to play in the future? How do we make sure that our children can adapt regardless of what technology comes along and what happens to them in the future? Because right now we're teaching them for jobs that don't even exist or won't exist in 5 years' time or even 2 years' time. We can't even tell them what the new jobs are going to be because we don't even know what they are yet. So that's a challenge. And I guess one of the biggest challenges is almost technology is driving the drumbeat of what humanity will become. So, and if you want to really put the melting pot on top of it, then we have our economy, which is being measured based on tangible assets when 90% of the world is intangible, i.e. digital assets. Even the way that money moves is digital, but yet we still measure it on outdated GDP and industrial models. So the AI train is moving. The real big question for all of us is, what do we need to evolve to keep up with the train?
So much to sort of ask on the back of all of that, because it really is a defining moment, I think, in human history. It kind of feels like maybe Atlantis is in front of us. Whose Atlantis is that going to be, though? Is that going to be our moment, or is that going to be their moment? If you see where I'm going with that, because there is a kind of techno-feudalistic view of tomorrow, and there's a more decentralized one. And I think for me, I get very excited. We're a crypto channel, and we see crypto generally being very impactful in regards to the world as we know it. You've studied the history of technologies. Every time a technology comes along, it changes the world. I think crypto is going to play a role in that. It's going to be the backbone upon which finance and various other things run. Identities, data, even you can tokenize data and do all these cool things, and that's increasingly becoming used for AI to solve provenance issues. But there's many converging technologies all at once, and I think it's quite scary to think where all of these lead us to, because what I think is very obvious is that it's going to be a very different world socially, economically, leisurely tomorrow than it is today. And I think trying to figure all of that out is often easier said than done. Back to the question of, do you think that this change that's happening is going to be for our benefit or perhaps demise? I mean, that's a huge question, but I do want to throw that to you straight away. Is this our moment or is this their moment?
It's an interesting one, right? If you speak to an engineer, the answer is universal basic income and we'll be all right.
Yeah.
Let's write a check and we'll all go home. And controversially, I think that's just such a lazy answer.
Agreed.
Because
Agreed.
we have all the intelligence in the world to create AI, but we haven't got the innovation or the intellect to change the underlying economic model, because it's quite frankly too hard for any technologist to think about. So look, I don't think it's demise, and I don't think it's dystopia as many people will have it.
Yep.
I do, though, worry that for some reason, I don't understand why, technology now is driving the direction of humanity. If you think about it, I saw Alistair Campbell talk about this the other day, and it really resonated with me. 20 years ago, it was philosophers and who knows who directed what humanity will become. Now it's engineers and technologists. Because we don't solve. I look at pitch decks all the time, right, for products, and all I ever see is terms of technologies. I never see human buyer's language. I never see all the things that would make me want to buy this product. It's almost like, no, I now have to tell the world this is Web3, and it's crypto this and crypto that, and but really the people you're selling to don't even know what that means. So we've become very much technology led rather than human led, and the technology is an enabler. Let me give an example of what that means and why those holes appear. So rightly, this channel focuses on crypto, but where the hell does that go on the balance sheet, on the accounting system, right?
Depends what
We have
country.
no
Yeah,
way of measuring intangible assets whatsoever, because no one's actually figured out how to solve the underlying system problem that this needs to run on. Even the original paper written on Bitcoin, what it is today, resembles nothing to what it was written.
agreed.
Almost like you could argue maybe 20 people in the world own most of the Bitcoin reserves.
Agreed.
Now, you can't tell me that's decentralized. So the technology, we make technology choices, but yet we never actually change the things and the environments that technology is deployed in and how it operates and how we behave. So it will not be dystopian, but what it might be is it will expose more cracks in the system over time because we haven't paid attention to the changes we need to make. So instead of looking at this as a catalyst for change, which I always look at it as, I'm not negative whatsoever. I think this is, if done in the right way, in the right lens, this is the greatest thing that could ever happen to us. It's
Yep.
a catalyst to undo all the things we should have done 20 years ago. The reality is, not many people think like that. So if I say that out loud, it's you're slowing down innovation, right? But the reality is I'm not. I'm actually opening the door to even more innovation and more possibility. It's just that you have to look at it very differently and not make technology drive the bus. It's a case of how do we all drive the bus and how do we fix the stuff along the way incrementally, rather than wait until the end, like old product problems were 20 years ago when no one invited cybersecurity because they thought they would say no. And guess what? At the end, they said no. And my worry is we get to the end of this and suddenly someone's going to go, oh, yeah, what about that? And suddenly that's a problem.
And we don't know what that is. I have this debate. I come from a very kind of morale point of view often. I've spent a lot of time studying religions, various different religions. I think everybody ought to, if nothing else, just to gain a bit more information on the world that previously was. The reason that I bring that up is, do you think technology is becoming a religion or is a religion? I think this is a really interesting question to ask you, because when you say we're being steered by technology, is that perhaps in the absence of a god? Do you see where
It's
I'm going with this?
Yeah, it's definitely in the absence of guide rails. And I think it's I think it's a combination of things. So I think we blame the regulator far too much because I think there's an expectation they're meant to suddenly be technologists and know everything. Um, I think we don't do enough of collaboration between industries and sectors and government working together. Um, in the absence of that, technology just moves because, hey, it just becomes a product release, right? The trouble is, every product release now is changing industry. This is not like it was when the SaaS days, when every feature was just an improvement to productivity. This is a fundamental industry change in every release. Like I wrote a piece for City AM the other day. You know, markets are affected now. It's like every time we release an AI product now, companies
Yep.
get their shares sold. Like it's almost
Well,
like
look
even people
look
in
at
the
software.
markets are forgetting fundamentals of how to actually analyze a business. It's like, my
Yep.
God, this is Armageddon. This business is never going to exist, and they don't even do the research to figure out the companies being the shares sold are more advanced in AI than the people building the AI. It's just that we create this scaremongering. I think the lack of guide rails in all of this and the involvement of people along the way is eventually going to bite us because and what's going to happen is what's happening with social media right now, where you'll see outright bans of things when the reality is that's after the horse is bolted, when really the answer should have been, well, putting guide rails in from the very beginning. But sometimes it's difficult to foresee these things. But I think where we are with AI now and all the mistakes we've made in the past, there's no excuse now because we have all this evidence from the internet age to now. So the question is, what do we need to learn from all of that and make sure this is pushed in the right direction? So AI reaches its full potential, not just us.
Yeah. Yeah, because there is this, this technology should be for our benefit. If you look at how it uses data, it's almost like we're there for its benefit, right? It kind of farms us and uses the knowledge that we have to potentially one day evolve itself. I don't know if we ever get that singularity. I personally am not entirely convinced of it. It seems evident that we're moving towards it, but we talk about a kind of AI singularity, then you're talking about an economic singularity. You're talking about this world that is interesting, and that is that their world or our world. This may be a current theme as we go throughout this conversation. You look around the world today, we've spoken about AI. Is AI really the main technology, just given how vast it is in regards to the industries that it's going to touch, that is on the conversations that you're having, or is it more broad? What other technologies are kind of floating around at the moment that are going to bring
Yeah, so
about?
it's not just AI. So you need to look at AI as convergent technology. It's also what AI touches. Um, I think the other interesting thing is digital back currency. So how this is potentially being used to create new economic flows and almost create new form of regionalization. So we're kind of in the world of globalization, or we have been. I think we're shifting to a world of regionalization, where you start to see regions adopting sovereignty, because I think sovereignty is becoming the new trend. Even news out a few days ago, we're starting to see countries trying to, EU particularly, promoting cloud providers, like startups, to, hey, come and be a cloud provider, because all of a sudden now it removes dependencies on other countries. So the big thing, I think, outside AI has actually kicked off an interesting debate geopolitically. It's very subtle, but you can kind of see it in the markets and you can see it in conversation, that it's actually forcing people to reevaluate risk and reevaluate ownership and sovereignty. So you start to see that in payments with digital backed currency. You'll start to see that with data privacy and new forms of data. And you also start to see it with AI. The other big one, which is really interesting here in Dubai, is it's not new, but it's kind of being able to be a bit more powerful because of AI, is digital twinning. Digital twinning in the context of prop tech and property is growing massively. And I guess the final piece of the puzzle, which was always more exciting to me than crypto, by the way, is tokenization, because the tokens give you utility. So the power of utility for me trumps any store of value, because utility actually makes ecosystems function. So I kind of see, and again, you can put all that into a melting pot, right? And you can say what converges out of this is entirely different perspectives on value and how a nation runs, right?
Let's talk about that world, because I think crypto has a, when I say the term crypto out loud, it's a little bit taboo. It's a little bit
Yeah.
esoteric. It's a little bit, it's kind of a dirty word almost, realistically, certainly given, depending on what political spectrum you're on, with everything that Trump's doing. And for me, I find it fair but unfair, because there's something, you talk about tokenization that happens on distributed ledgers typically, and whether it's private or public is, this thing that's, we're debating. A lot of people I speak to believe public, very few believe private, but we'll see. It's kind of a little bit unfair in the sense that there is a broad innovation going on here. What are some of the conversations that you're having recently around crypto? In fact, before I ask you that, let's talk about the convergence of these technologies and what that brings us onto. What kind of a world do you think? How can we even predict 10 years out or 5 years out realistically, given how fast things are moving? But what kind of a world, if there was a kind of stream in terms of your thoughts about the world that we're moving towards, what is that world? I don't know if that's 5 years out, 10 years out. A question to throw at you though, for sure. What world are we moving
So
towards?
I think I'm going to say this out loud because I'm writing another book, but I'll say it out loud anyway. I think we're moving to a model from wealth to intelligence. So I think in the next 5 years, our economy will be based on intelligence and how much we can share it and how much we can use it. Because I would argue now that data and the intelligence that flows as a result of it is more powerful than money. And I would even say that data is more, and energy, actually. Data and energy now are becoming much more important than water to a nation that has these things. Because if you don't have the infrastructure and you can't move data around, you've got nothing. And I think in the next 5 years, we are moving into a model of an intelligence-based economy. That's really the big shift. You can see it. You can literally see it already with the way that people are able to build applications really quickly, the way they're sharing intelligence already. Like, forget AI, people share intelligence today in kids in Roblox. They share that intelligence in communities, right? So the value exchange now is actually intelligence, which is a combination of data, identity, and value. So I think as time progresses, that unit of exchange and those macroeconomics will change. 10, 15 years out, we end up in a different world altogether. If I want to be, I don't like the term, but I'll go full futurist on you. If you follow the path, you end up then into a cognitive type economy where we start merging sensors and we start merging things, which is what Elon Musk is trying to do. And then somewhere in between all of that, you've got off-planet economies. So the biggest interesting push right now is the move to data centers in space. So space is very much being seen to be the next battleground. So if that reinforces the thesis, if we are moving to an economy based on intelligence, then the most important artifacts and infrastructure that will be built out will be based on energy and data, and human ability. So that's kind of my bet for the next 2 to 3, maybe even 5 years, not 10, because 10 is too tricky. But I think we will see the shift to that. But there's also a lot of moving parts underneath that, which are not clear yet, which is the macro geopolitical picture, which is kind of a moving picture on a daily basis in itself.
Yes, certainly with the likes of the President of the United States, it's moving post by post. It's we follow the markets, and I'm just like, give us a break, for goodness sake. Yeah. 1 minute we're not good, then we're not. And I mean, if you look at what came out of Davos, there was a lot of this kind of sovereignty within Europe, so European sovereignty, kind of Canadian sovereignty, this kind of undoing of the world order as we know it, which is a kind of dollar-based system. There was a lot of that, and it's interesting. You mentioned sort of a while ago there the idea of sovereignty in the form of the cloud, because the one reason America is so powerful is because of the technology companies that it has. Right, that's one big reason. There is a push away from that, and actually, we speak with crypto projects that are trying to enable that. Again, crypto is a dirty word, but there is something real going on that gets completely smeared in a lot of the disasters that sort of come out for it. One question I've got for you: do you think capitalism works in that system that we're moving towards? Probably not, right?
So, what is capitalism, though?
So, for me, yeah.
But what was defined as capitalism doesn't exist anymore. So we just never gave it a name. We have no idea what it is. Like, I wrote a Substack on this a few weeks ago. It's almost like we put every economic framework in a blender, and that's what we're left with right now.
Yeah.
Look, the fundamental principles of capitalism is a free market.
Yep.
No one side is meant to know more than the other. Well, that's not true. Because in the environment that we're in now, a lot of the platform companies know more than the people they're buying off. There's no asymmetry in the market because there's no fair market price. There's no competition. This is not capitalism. So I don't know when this happened. I don't know whether it's a result of coming out of the 80s and 90s into the internet age, where we had this big boom of centralization. But then you could argue the banking industry did that for years until open banking happened, right?
Yep.
The tech industry is just a replica of the CMA9 in the UK. They all offer the same thing, ironically, with just some extra features like a current account. It's the same model. We're almost like sleepwalking into the same problem. So no, I think capitalism as we know it doesn't exist, as in what it was written down to be. But the crazy thing is, it's been allowed to evolve into something, but the underlying economic principles have never changed. In terms of GDP has never changed. The measurements of the economy have never changed. Yet the instruments that move around it are very different. And the way that fair market value and competition runs are very different. But yet we, for whatever reason, we're hung on the word capitalism and that's going to die. I'd argue that died a very long time ago. I'm not quite sure what it is now. Whether I tried to give it about 4 different names in my Substack and I gave up because I don't know what it is. It's just a hybrid of many things. that we probably need to sit down at some point, and particularly with AI in the room, and say, we may need to start thinking about measuring things a little bit differently. And maybe this again is that moment where we have a catalyst to actually define something that endures over time, but can change and adapt.
Yeah, I think thinking about all these problems are the defining point between this being your moment or somebody else's. This world is coming. I love that take on capitalism because I often think about that myself. Have we been sold this ideology that just I've never known in my lifetime? How can you have this idea of a free, fair market when you have the complete control of money and its distribution, monopolization in regards to financial instruments, technology companies, all of this stuff? I mean, is that capitalistic? Actually, it resembles more of a kind of socialistic middle,
it's weird.
communistic ground.
That's why I kind of use the analogy of a blender in my piece, because it's like blended different elements of different economic frameworks, and we somehow have walked into it and accepted it because, well, we don't know any different, right? The average person doesn't really care about these things, rightly so. They should worry more about, well, will I get paid today, and do I have a roof over my head? And they're much more important things to worry about. It's like you and I worry about these boring things. But
Yeah.
you kind of look at it though holistically, and you go, well, okay, if we can't give it a name, okay, that's fine. But nearly all of the things that we measure today aren't fit for purpose for the world we're walking into. So where's that conversation happening? And that's my worry, is I don't see those conversations happening. I see the same conversations happening, but with a technology that's almost, I use the joke that it's like using 21st century governance to manage 24th century technology. Like, we're still talking about data privacy. We're still talking about, I don't know, it's important, but the means of doing it, there are better ways because we have better technology to do it. And my worry is we just don't have the right people in the room as a collective to support the regulator in their thinking. But also, I think the regulator and the government, in a way, need to think about, like I do in a way, what are these second order effects? If I make this choice, what do I break in 12 months' time, 24 months' time? What do I encourage because I make this choice? So it's almost like you want to step back and go, what are the second order, third order, fourth order effects of making this decision? I think we just don't do enough of that. But we just revert to what we know, evolve it slightly, but still stick to it, when we need to ask ourselves, almost go back to first principles and say, what do we know to be true? And what do we know that doesn't work? And what do we need to change?
Almost deliberate. If you look at maybe how governments work, there's this kind of almost incentive to keep things broken so that their various departments can continue to exist. I don't think we should be looking to the government to save us. I know you're definitely not suggesting that, but I think more broadly, there's almost feels like there's this spell being put upon. I can talk about us here in the UK. I know you're from the UK. We've actually got similar origins in regards to where we come from, but there's almost like this spell that's been put on us that actually most people that I talk to don't even know what money is or how it works. They haven't got a clue. They genuinely have not got. Most people still think that it's backed by gold, that gold sits in a vault somewhere, and there's this kind of whole magic alchemy of finance that they don't need to worry about, but they do. Because this world that we're moving towards is one that you're going to get to maybe define a little bit in regards to your status. You mentioned this kind of worry that you have. Maybe we can sell people on why they should be paying attention to this. Why do you think people should be paying attention to the technologies that are about today? Because it is going to impact their lives. Maybe you could give us a little piece on that.
Yeah. So again, this is not to be dystopian. It's about being positive. Like,
Of course.
first of all, if you have access to the technology, use it. Be
Yep.
curious in a controlled way. That's the thing we don't do enough of, is we're not curious enough. And I know we've got time commitments and things in our lives,
Of course.
but I think it's important to accept that the technology is not going anywhere. It's always going to be here. Now, what we want to pay attention to is what we give away freely in the technologies, and what we believe, what we put our trust into, because we can't do. The general public doesn't really know these numbers because they're not really. You won't find this in your average newspaper, but most cybersecurity attacks happen globally because of human error. They don't happen because the technology failed. It's because a scammer created something that was so realistic that someone fell for it. And the challenge we've got is people just don't have the attention span anymore. And their literacy when it comes to data is really poor. And that's primarily because of technology has made us a bit lazy. Our days are really busy. We don't have time. If it says it came from the bank, it must be real, and I'll click OK. So, we have to also have a mindset of trust but validate. So I think be curious with the technology, but also be very diligent in what you say yes to and what you say no to. And I also think, part of the Our Moment book was for those who to demand change. Maybe they want a different way of managing technology. Maybe they want to learn something slightly different, a different way for their children. Maybe they would like to use their data in a very different way than it is today. These are things that need to be debated with politicians, with governments, and even businesses. I don't think we just do enough. But for the individual, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford AI and use it, you should. But at the same time, be diligent of what you give away, and be diligent of what you say yes or no to. Because I think it's in people's interests now to be much more actively aware. Like I get about, even where I live, I get like 4 or 5 spam texts a day that are scams, right? But I know what to look for because I work for companies that made us do the training. So like I'm lucky enough, I know what to see. Even sometimes I get scammed because wow, that's so realistic. But I think no, people, if I was going to give you like 3 things to sum up what I've just said, which is look, use it if you can. Be be diligent around what you accept. And I think the third piece of the puzzle is, maybe ask questions around, can things be different? And should they be different? Because I think those are the 3 things we need to be doing. Because I don't see the school system sustainable in the next 20 years if it carries on teaching people to memorize information and pass tests when a machine can do that now anyway. So I just don't see that as a sustainable model. And I know we talked about it before we went on air, I speak to parents all the time, and, the book has an abilities learning model, and there is a model outside of it, which I help people with. They ask me all the time, what should I be teaching my children? Should I be teaching them at home? Should I be allowing them to go to school? Are they going to be ready for the future that probably won't exist when they arrive? There's a million questions that people should be asking. Like I've given you 3 examples, but the third I think is the most important one, which is, are we getting enough for what we need in the future? That's a question we all should be asking.
Being real with ourselves as well. I think
Yeah.
You mentioned something in regards to the potential for this. One thing that I think about, and I'll ask this quickly, is this term equality. And maybe it's because I'm not, I like to think of myself as a good person. I genuinely will go out of my way to help people if I can, and try and be compassionate and loving to absolutely everybody. Genuinely try and do that, whether that's my nature or not. But it's something that I try and do regardless. Okay. When we talk about equality and the ability for these technologies to help that, do we really want a equal world?
So
I don't know.
So it depends what you mean by equal. So I'll rephrase it slightly. And you can tell me if we're on the same page. So I think what we should be aiming for is an inclusive world. So the data chasm that we're about to walk into is going to be humongous. It's going to be huge, right? Financial inclusion has never been solved. Primarily, it's an identity problem because a lot of people can't prove their identity. Secondly, some people don't have a home, so they can't have a home address to get a bank account. So we've never really solved that problem. And there are other reasons as well, not just those 2. Now, the data chasm could be even worse. Now, this opens up a whole myriad of problems, and it actually impacts the technology more than we think. So if these models that power agents, AI like ChatGPT, only has one version of the world, half of it, and the other half is dark, how on earth is that model ever reaching its potential when it's only got half a view of the world's data, right? So first of all, it's going to impact all technology companies because they haven't got enough data. They've only got a single perspective, which is the Western world, put it that way, and maybe parts of the economy that are more affluent. Second piece, the jigsaw then, is then you create an intelligence divide. You can have half of the UK maybe that has access to an AI, which means they can produce work faster, they can be more productive, they know more, they can apply more. And then you've got the other half that don't have it. And now I've got complete inequality and rights to use it. So that to me is, and then of course, then you layer on top. So this word I despise, which is third world countries, because realistically, there's no such thing. It's a country that's been able to do more with less resources. That's what it means. And there's so many things that we can learn from those markets to improve our own. But the sad thing is they will never get, under the current model, the infrastructure they need or the rights they need to create and generate data and use tools such as this, which means we all lose out in the end. So the bigger question for me is, and I know the US and many other markets have put the big four under pressure to say, well, what are you going to do for the economy to create jobs? I actually think that's the wrong question. I think the better question is, what are you guys going to do to ensure, and I would put the government to task for this as well, what are you all going to do to ensure that everybody has fair access to all of these technologies? And I'd even argue, controversially, when do we make these technologies critical service infrastructure like the water company? Because they're now becoming so critical to how society functions. I find it hard to believe that we don't hold them to the same account as we would any other utility that we use on a daily basis. So I think inclusion is going to have to be one of the biggest topics as this rolls out, because otherwise it's going to create a massive divide. And I think the second piece of the puzzle is, what do we do as these technologies become even more pervasive? The internet was different, right? You can live, as crazy as it sounds, you can probably live without the internet if you've never had it, right? Because there's still, luckily, access to physical services. There's still access to certain things that you don't need to physically go on the internet. However, as AI becomes pervasive, that becomes a big problem, because that's affecting industry and is giving one side an advantage over another, which I don't think is fair. But I think as an economy, we all lose out in the process.
I think that's a really good way, an interesting way of sort of looking at it all. Certainly, I mean, I invest in companies that are kind of AI infrastructure. I know you'd mentioned about providing these services in space and that being a whole frontier that we're trying to embark on. I've got my skepticism somewhat about it. I think skepticism is a great thing to have, but also being realistic and admitting when you're wrong comes very sharply with that. At what point does all this become a matter of national security and kind of a nation's security, and also an equality issue? There's lots of different forms of equality. I don't really think as men we want to be equal, if that makes sense. I truly do believe that. I don't know whether I'm wrong for saying that, but I think we always, why do I go to the gym a few more times than you do? You know?
Yeah.
Well, and actually that whole maybe selfish desire of wanting to be better than the person next to us, it doesn't have to, it can be financially, it can be whatever. Actually, I think has driven a hell of a lot of innovation to come out of us. But I think a lot of this.
I think you make a really good point though. And it's something I mentioned in the book, is there's a danger we'll treat everybody generically and the same with AI.
Yeah.
And I think this comes back to then using your own data, because your own data realistically is a representation of you, like all your habits, all your uniqueness. Right now, we get very general answers because, to be fair, AI knows nothing about us. It has to build that picture up over time, but it's still going to give us a generic answer because it didn't know what I did yesterday and it doesn't know what I want to do tomorrow. It knows nothing about me. It's just comparing me to someone like me, which is really, if you think about what was in the book, the heart of the book was, because no one owns data, no one can. But if data were licensed and I had access to my insight and all the information, who's to say I couldn't have my own personal agent that knew everything about me because it had access to all the data about me, because it has secure access to my data, or at least the data that I have access to. Because let's be frank, today we focus so much on AI and we forget the fact that most of the data in the country is atrocious.
Yep.
Healthcare data is not connected whatsoever. Nobody can tell me. I was writing this in the original manuscript. I took it out, but I'll say it anyway. I think it's hilarious that a man can launch a rocket to space and bring it back down to Earth, but it's 2026 and I haven't got a single view of my health, which is hilarious. So, we're focusing on the tool again, and this is again looking back at patterns. We've been here before. We were here with SaaS software in the 90s. You have to buy this piece of software, your business is going to fail, but they never fixed the data problem. And now AI is going to be the silver bullet without fixing the data problem. I think nations are going to have to face into the fact that, to get this to really work, we've got to put a deeper focus on data, but not to protect it, to make sure we can create an environment that's secure so it can be shared, that people have access to the data that is rightfully theirs, because they generated the insight that is theirs, right? Because we're entering into a whole myriad of conversations now, like who owns prompts, for example. Like if I created a really cool prompt, should I be able to license that? What happens if I want to move all my data from OpenAI to Claude? Should I be able to do that? See, because we focus so much on the tools, we're busily creating silos again. We're busily creating a problem we're going to have to fix in 2 years' time, because how long did it take just get internet companies to give us our data back or share it? God, like years and years. Like I can get my maps data back now from Google, which is great. Do you know what my option is? Download a JSON file. Now I'm a 40-year-old, if you were 40 or 50-year-old or 60-year-old, like what's a JSON file? So these are some of the questions that probably a regulator doesn't know how to answer because they're too busy rightly figuring out privacy, where the only reason economies will function in 5 years' time is interoperability and the ability to actually move data around securely, but at the same time, allow it to be able to move between people and devices and software. I don't see that conversation happening very often.
So there's a reason I'm all in crypto. It's not just because I want to speculate on like meme coins and make loads of money, which is easier said than done, by the way. It's because I truly see crypto as the kind of convergence of what you're talking about. You talk about data and the kind of owning and tailoring and interoperability and kind of unlocking of it. I think, and I'd love your take on this, that actually you can do that through tokenization. You mentioned tokenization as the big kind of theme. We speak with a lot of companies, including some of which that have the likes of Mr. Metcalfe working for them, that are literally tokenizing data as we speak, and they're using it in the realms of AI. They're using it to create knowledge graphs and all of these things. And then actually, once you have that tokenized, crypto is still solving its own interoperability problems, but then you could maybe figure out a framework to make that data ownable, transparent, but concealable, and also interoperable in regards to the world as we know it. And actually, when we talk about AI agents, there's a need for them to communicate across multiple different platforms. I actually think crypto is that enabler that's going to make that happen financially through tokenized money. But also in regards to data and it being able to carry from one to another. What do you think about this idea of using crypto to solve?
I'm glad you raised this. Not many people do, right? So the reason the book took 2 years to write in the original version is because I had to solve everything you just said.
Yeah.
So that model exists conceptually. It can be built.
Okay.
I designed it all 4 years ago. So in the book, actually, and I don't use technical terms because it was not relevant to a 14-year-old and I wanted the book to be evergreen. So the way you do this is you need a few puzzle pieces to come together. So the first is, and you rightly say, you're tokenizing data. But I had to create and design a whole lot of ancillary services then on top of that to make the data real, which I did. So I came up with a way of actually valuing data itself, which I'm looking to get money for, by the way. So anyone's giving me money, I can actually value and rate and certify data as real and watermark it. So that was the first piece of the puzzle. The cornerstone was the concept of a super wallet, which is effectively a gateway to the whole ecosystem. So that has actually been designed. It was designed outside of the book and it was abstracted so a reader would get excited by wanting one. The concept of a super agent was designed 4 years ago, before agents were a thing. So the super agent would exist in the wallet as a plugin, connected then into a service layer of data trusts and identity guardians, which is effectively giving you digital identities. And then effectively various other services that you would consume and activate, and then you can position and settle that data and tokenize it and move it across an exchange. And the blockchain component comes in because I can now license that data. And through various technologies that even I had 3 years ago, that means I can actually collateralize data. And I also came up with the accounting model with this as well, because actually that's the missing piece of the jigsaw. Because this has never been a technology problem that we're describing. This is an accounting problem, because none of these things have anywhere to go on the balance sheet. So in writing the original manuscript, I rewrote the entire balance sheet. And because I used to work for JP Morgan, I figured out how to amortize all of this as well. So I was able to put not just data on the balance sheet, but also people and AI. Because the people problem comes back from before the industrial age, because people are liabilities on the balance sheet, not assets, even though companies say they're assets. Bless them. But when there's a problem in financial markets, where do they go? Everything leads you to the balance sheet and the cost column. But you have no idea what skill set or abilities left the building. Now, with AI, you need those abilities more than ever, because actually that's what's going to interpret the model and improve the system. So I came up with a way of actually valuing people and shifting them from the liability column to the asset column, and also valuing AI itself as an employee. So I had to create the entire thing that you're describing 4 years ago in the writing. It was never put into the original book because it was too much for the average reader. But that entire conceptual model is patented and can be built. All of it can be built. Even the license framework can be built and shoved on a blockchain. I even worked out the tokens 4 years ago that would do this and update all the metadata, give you all the visualizations in the wallet, and move the data around and value it and all of those components. All of that was done a long time ago.
Do you think this is reality? Do you think this is where we're heading?
I think it's a model that will solve a lot of problems. The first problem it solves is intellectual property. That's the first problem it solves. It solves interoperability. It also solves transparency. And it also solves a regulatory problem. Because the best will in the world, the regulator in data privacy, that horse has bolted a long time ago. There's no such thing as data privacy. We're living in dreamland if we think there is. But the truth is, the most regulated document in the world is the P&L and the balance sheet and the financial statement, which has to be published on a quarterly basis or at least a few times a year. Now, if data, so I came up with a thesis in the very beginning of writing it. The problem is, particularly with data, everybody was trying to change the rules of the game, right? They were going to Capitol Hill and they were saying, right, big tech, we want all the money that we're owed for all the data we've given you. Now, in a way, that's no different than how big tech behaves, right? Big tech makes money out of data. So the reality is data is a story and a memory. It's not a transaction. We just made it that way because of technology. So I realized that the only way to win this game is to make data part of the game, not change the rules of it. So to answer that question, you have to ask yourself what runs the world. What runs the world is a balance sheet, because every company has a balance sheet, and it all rolls up to a nation's balance sheet. And ultimately, it's central bank and everything else. So if data now is on the financial statement, by law, every time that data is used, it has to be transparent, either as data that was purchased and its origin, or data that was used. So in effect, the thing that I came up with 4 years ago was to turn data into an actual asset like electricity, which means I could find a home for it on the financial statement. That's what I solved. So I very quickly realized that the most important asset of our lifetime, which apparently has no value, yet people go to court for it, people fight for it, and people steal it, but yet apparently it has no value. I would argue it just hasn't been valued, which is the problem I had to solve. So I think, again, we asked at the start, what do I look for? It's more I look for what people are not seeing, what people are seeing. The whole world is running around talking about AI, but no one's talking about us, and no one's really talking about the asset that's the most important in all of this, which is data. And by making it an asset would also mean it now becomes a board level concern for businesses and not owned by technology, which is, by the way, irrespective of what data is right now. I tell every board CEO I meet, this does not belong to the technology department. this is your strategic asset that's going to make you very rich and very secure and very competitive in the next 12 months to 3 years. So yeah, that it solves so many problems, because then we don't no longer are fighting. The other thing it solves is deep fakes, because I would know
Which we
where the
need.
data came from, and I know it was real, and I know what created it. And the beauty of the wallet I created and all the certificates, they're all machine readable. So even a machine would know they're real. So yeah, no, it solves so many problems. I very rarely talk about it, because it's not at a level where most people care, because we're talking now, you and I are describing physical implementations of things, right? But the bottom line is, it was possible 4 years ago. The things I wrote about in the book around your own personal agent were possible when Siri was created. The problem was none of our data was connected when Siri was created. So we could never have a personal view of our health because our data was so fragmented. Because as it is today, as it was back then, the priority is the technology and the tools, not the data and the people.
Extremely interesting. You know, this is where I ultimately see things going. Is there's this kind of digital world that we all get put into. You know, we talk about metaverse, and we talk about people putting on a VR headset and things like this. No, I think it's more real than that. It's this kind of digital version that we're already forming and have a bit of, that's coming in a big way, where everything connects and there's this kind of virtual you. That for me is more the metaverse than this idea of running around stabbing each other with VR on.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I'm sure
The original paper, actually, which the book came from, was called Data and Augmented Worlds. I'll tell you that, because the original paper was a response to the metaverse. I was given it as a piece of work to say, we need to understand what happens when the physical and the virtual world bleeds into one. The focus was what happens to data in those worlds, and what do we create. So I spanned across all the different dimensions of data in that context. And I'm with you. It's not going to be, me chasing after Pokemons and things like that. What it is going to be, though, is new data sets we've never seen. Like in that original paper 4 years ago, I said that human emotion would become a data set, and that's turned to be true, but it's still not regulated as such. So my argument was true, but the response still hasn't happened. Like the human voice now is a data set. But we've seen celebrities' voices be taken without their consent, but none of that is regulated properly. But no, it won't be running around with avatars, but it will be almost this phygital environment where these environments will bleed together, and they'll bring you a new level of convenience and interaction. But it also raises the trust bar quite a bit in terms of what is real and what is not, because also raises the questions about internet advertising and things, particularly in headsets in these environments. And we haven't even talked about accessibility needs and things like that. So, there's a whole gambit of things when you enter that space. Because I don't think that ever failed. I just think it was put on the back burner while all the other technologies converge. It's inevitable, but it may take. I always believed a Meta probably heading in the right direction. It would be a smaller set of glasses because the headsets were too heavy, and it was too soon. It was perfect for industry as Google glasses were, but it's probably not right for general population out in the wild yet.
But it will come. No, we're on this. We're on this. I think very clear trajectory. That again, I feel like I always speak for us here in the UK. Most people are asleep to, because they've got so much, in all fairness, to worry about in terms of making ends meet. We deal in financial markets. I know you've got a financial background. We know the kind of poverty line that most people sit on, and it kind of seems almost silly for them to have these conversations. But actually, part of them moving that poverty, I'm a big believer that investing can change the needle in your life if done right. Who knows what done right is? I suppose making money, but this is all stuff people should definitely think about moving forward. Michael, I'm very mindful of your time. I do want to ask you. I could sit here and talk to you all day long. What's your big sort of take on crypto? In regards to maybe how it was given to us and what it's here to do.
So
Big take.
Right now, let's take a step back. I think crypto unfortunately succumbed to bad projects in the early days. It's actually what caused blockchain to be a swear word in businesses. We succumbed to NFTs was really a bad advert for crypto, really. Plus, in the early days, it was seen as, ironically, the people who said it was money laundering are now, saying it's the best thing for banking, right? But I think it's a bit like all the other technologies. I'm afraid is we're so focused on talking about crypto, we are forgetting the value proposition to the end consumer for using crypto. So, like, you and I both understand what crypto means, but the average man or woman in the street doesn't know why they need it and what they're going to get from it as a value proposition and a set of benefits. I think the only way these technologies will ever fly is, one, with crypto, they've got to be able to be settled and positioned. That's to start with. If I can't settle them in an environment, now the UK has done massive strides in this with the stock exchange to be able to settle cryptocurrencies. So that's a big step forward. So that ticks that box. But still, the end consumer has to have trust, and they have to know what benefits they're getting and what the value proposition is. I think crypto has a place, and I think it will, particularly with AI and, like I said, I mentioned before, the utility side. But I think it's got a long way to go. I'm really actually interested in terms of what happens with nation-backed digital currency. I'll be interested to see what the uptake of that will be, and whether that's just a hedge for sort of cross-border trade, particularly within BRICS markets. But I think it will. It is an enduring currency. I think the crypto winter is a bit of a red herring. I think it's just a combination of people exiting the market because they just made a lot of money and they sat on their money for a very long time. We saw the blip, didn't we, at about 105,000 when a massive whale just checked out, and that crashed the market down to about the 90s. So I don't think crypto's dying and going anywhere soon. I think we just need a meaningful value exchange for it. I think, like, for example, if it's going to coexist with fiat, why would I need crypto over fiat for this particular scenario? What's the value proposition for me? Let me give you an example. In the UK, open banking was a thing. Banks had to share all their data. And I was involved in helping write the strategy for one of the banks involved in that in the early days. And I still help banks globally and retailers. The problem's always the same. We focus way too much on open banking and not on the proposition. Because really, open banking should enable a better product or a service. So crypto should, in same guise, should enable a better experience or a better trusted scenario. So let me give you a real world example on open banking to see the difference between two approaches. So mortgages are horrible, right? Your affordability conversation can take hours in a branch, even today. But if I walked into the branch, I sat down with the mortgage advisor and they said, right, we're going to do your assessment now. Give me all your data from all your bank accounts using open banking. You're going to say no, right? It's like, why would I need to do that? Replay that. Mortgage advisor says to you, right, we're going to do your affordability. Now, there's two ways we can do this. The first way is if you give me all of your data to all of your accounts, I can give you a decision in 30 seconds. Or we'll do the old way, and it's going to be 3 hours. Now, the value proposition in this argument is time. The trouble with crypto is you're not telling me that equivalent value proposition. Under what considerations should I use this? What am I getting? What does it mean? And it's a danger of any good engineering-led project. The engineer defines the product spec. That's the problem. And the problem there is you lead with the technology, how great it is. Can you imagine a CEO, how many times he hears the word Web3 every day, or how many times he's pitched a Web3 product, but no one can tell him in buyer's language why he needs it or she needs it and the impact it's going to make on their customers positively. I think we need to accept the technology works. It works. We know it works. Blockchain works really well. Forget the technology. What's the narrative we want to sell to buyers and consumers and why they should put their trust in this? I'll give you an example. I used to work for MasterCard many years ago, right? Contactless payments in the UK, as you know, well, bombed. Do you know what took it to them to actually explode? They allowed contactless payments on the tube. Immediately, there was a value exchange for the passenger, time. I could now tap my card and go straight through the barrier and on my way to work. No more queuing. Don't have to do that. Go straight through. And now it's probably used more than getting Oyster cards, right? So the point is that technology enabled a value exchange and a value proposition. I think for crypto to take the next level, we have to stop talking about crypto more and accept it works and talk more about what we're giving the consumer back for using crypto. Those are the conversations I don't think we have enough, because all the pitch decks I ever see almost have to have crypto to make them legitimate, rather than, oh yeah, we use this, but actually this is the problem we're actually solving, and this is what it means for you. So I think it has a place, and it will definitely, it's not going anywhere. We just need to do a better job of selling it to the end user and businesses and probably government.
Yep. And I think they all will end up using it, but like you say, for me, because we're in the industry, we kind of see the unlocks. So, for example, working at MasterCard or wherever it is, you kind of understand how payments work and the fees that are involved in that on a day-to-day basis. Also, the speed, the capital. I mean, there's something real and tangible here. Yeah. I think the industry is just like an infant in the sense that when we talk crypto, people just think Bitcoin.
Yeah. And we have to almost educate the consumer away from that and tell them what they get for it. Like open banking, another great one, right? You save millions on interchange fees if you use an open banking rail. That's an immediate saving for a retailer. Great, I save 1.5 million rather than using a card. I'm in. Because all businesses care about is, do I trust it? And is it safe? And is it secure? Same as a customer would say. And both people will say the same thing to you. What's in it for me?
Extremely insightful, this entire conversation. I think the last thing really for me to do, and I could sit here and talk to you all day long, is just thank you for your time and ask you to send people in your direction. Where would you send them? And we'll leave links in the description to where people can go and find out more.
Yeah, best place is obviously LinkedIn. That's where the whole world congregates these days, if you're an adult. So yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. You'll find my website on there and links to the book as well. So if you don't have access, ourmoment.ai is the book website. That'll take you, I think you get a free chapter. I think you get the first chapter for free. And it takes you to the Amazon links of whatever bookstores are in your region. You can download it there.
Fantastic. Michael, it has been an absolute pleasure. I could sit and talk to you all day long. There's going to be links for where you can find all that in the description. Last thing for me to do is thank you. Thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.